And of course, going to infinite love is not, don't imagine it as going some other place, like some sort of super hidden dimension somewhere. No, no, no. Going into infinite love is right here, right now. This, all of this. So when your grandmother dies, or your grandfather dies, or your parents die, or your children die, or your pet dies, your friend dies, what happens? Literally, they become you. This right here, everything is here. Your grandparents' consciousness, your mother's consciousness, your father's consciousness, your children's consciousness, your dog's or cat's consciousness, all the consciousness of all the people who have ever lived is right here, right now, in your consciousness. But you are separating yourself from that because you need to create an identity of being a self, which is why you've created, in the first place, these ideas of my grandparents' consciousness, my mom's consciousness, my dog's consciousness, other people, you know, Hitler from the past or Caesar from the Roman times, who's long dead. Do you think that these people have gone somewhere? They haven't gone anywhere. They're right here. Only their forms have disappeared. And you think that those people are dead only because in your mind you're attached to their forms. See, Caesar's right here. Hitler is right here. Anyone who's ever died in your life is right here. Nothing has happened to them. Nothing bad has ever happened to anybody in reality. That's the truth of death. And of course, this will all be radically denied, totally denied, by society, by your family, by your friends, by your own mind. And I will be called a devil for saying this. I will be called evil for saying this. I will be called a monster. I will be called deluded. I will be called a cult leader. I will be called insane. I will be called religious and woohoo and new age for saying all these things. And why would I be called all those? Precisely because everything I said here has to be denied if you want to continue living life as a finite being. Which is why this is, I gotta talk to you in school. You're not gonna read it in some textbook. I remember the first time I became aware of the possibility of immortality. This happened long before I actually awoke and realized it personally. But you know, we gotta start somewhere. So usually the way this process works is that you hear stories of immortality and you think they're just stories until one day you hear enough of these stories that a possibility, a radical new possibility, opens up in your mind that maybe they're not just stories. Maybe that immortality is actually possible. Not as a science fiction scenario where your brain gets uploaded into some computer. No, no, no. Actually possible as a function of changing how you perceive reality. That is the key insight that is necessary. That won't get you where you need to be. That's just the key insight that opens the door through which then it's a long corridor you have to walk through before you actually reach immortality. But that initial opening of the door is a critical step. And I can explain when I first realized this. This was years before I actually awoke. I think I was reading some sort of Zen parable. You know, those Zen koans and things, Zen stories, which are kind of fun and cute to read. And I was reading this story where, in this story, they were talking about a forest, trees, and a forest. And the story said something along the lines of, if a tree identifies with being a tree and that tree in that forest is cut down, that's the end of that tree. But if the tree identifies with being not a tree, but the entire forest, and one of the trees in the forest is cut down, the forest is immortal, and it can never die. And when I read that, that was my first clue as to this being a real possibility. Because I realized at that point that what if my whole life is just like that tree? What if I'm misidentifying? If I switch my identity from being that of a human, this body, to that of being the entire universe? If I can make that shift in identity, that might be enough to make me immortal. And sure enough, that's the case. You might say, Martyros, but what if they cut down the whole forest? If you cut down the whole forest, then it's all dead. And so your immortality fails. That's correct, because this is just an analogy. You know, every analogy has its limits. So in this analogy, if you did cut down the whole forest, that would be the end, because you identify with being a forest. A forest is still a finite, limited, formed thing. So for you to truly become immortal, you would have to not identify with being a forest. You'd have to identify with being infinite